Shades here. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, after 3 videos and over 2 hours of footage, Khorne, that lovely old blood god, has been completed. Now, they were my first videos on Chaos, so I also had to include a lot of information on the Chaos gods in general. So here's hoping, fingers crossed, that these next videos on the other main Chaos gods go a lot smoother and, most importantly, are considerably shorter. The aim is to complete the study of each Chaos god in 1 video each. I'm starting to learn, however, that most of my plans tend to change considerably as the videos go on, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, one thing I can tell you for absolute certain is that this video is on the second most powerful Chaos god, and that is Tzeentch, the Changer of the Ways and Supreme Lord of Dark Magics. Now this dude is very strange, and kinda trippy actually, so should be fun. Let's begin. So, to get an overview of the god Tzeentch himself, please refer to my first Chaos Lore video. I shall leave a link in the description below, as that contains the basics on each of the 4 main Chaos gods. The part on Tzeentch begins at around the 31.5-minute mark, so go check that out and let me know when you're done. Okay? Are we done? Brilliant. So, now that you're all caught up, on to the good stuff. The characters that make up the Lord of Change's army and really give it its personality. Beginning with the demons of Tzeentch. Now, following the same formula as we did for Khorne, let's start off with the different lesser demons of Tzeentch, the ones that make up the bulk of a demonic army. Now, the demons that are the equivalent to your typical foot soldiers are called horrors, so let's begin with them. Being demons of a god that is a manifestation of change, it is extremely difficult to describe what a horror is. Their bodies are not of any specific shape, and can best really be described as blobs with appendages. What's interesting, however, is as Tzeentch is also a god of magic, their bodies are said to be made up of pure magical energy, given solid physical form. When roaming across the battlefield, their bodies constantly change shape and colour, which, as you can imagine, makes them exceptionally hard to fight. Not only are their own bodies in a state of constant change, but everything that they touch is warped and mutated. So much so that even thinking about picturing a battle against these things is enough to give one a headache, to say the least. And don't get me started on what could happen if their bodies come into contact with human skin, for example. You might look down at your arm and find it has become a writhing tentacle. And wouldn't that be nice? As you might imagine from beings completely made up of magical energy, each horror is also a sorcerer. And while one horror might only have the ability of letting loose a small magical fireball, the scary thing about these blobs is that they like to travel in packs, so it might be 20 magical fireballs hurtling your way. Of all the demons, it is Tzeentch's children that most represent chaos in its truest form, being made up of dark magic that is in constant flux. After all, what is the definition of chaos, if not incomprehensible, unrelenting change? When summoned onto the battlefield, the pink horrors Tzeentch's foot soldiers pop into and out of existence, seemingly at random. They caper and prance about, their squeals and screams giving voice to the insanity of their existence. Being made up of pure chaos magic, the air around them shimmers with chaotic energy, so much so that merely being in their presence brings risk of mutation to their mortal enemies, and Sigmar help you if they lay one chaotic finger upon you. Here follows a nice little account from that ever more useful book, the Liber Chaotica. Dear gods, do you see them? The fire demons, the horrors of Tzeentch. I see them. I see them here. I saw them then. They follow me from my sleep into my day. Their limbs leak fire, but not the normal sort. Oh no, but the liquid fire of raw magic. It is coloured like the 8 winds themselves. Wait, let's pause for a second. Okay. Whilst Tzeentch is the god of change, he is also a god of magic, and whether it's the Liber Chaotica or any other literature on the subject, magic is mentioned often. Therefore, after this video on Tzeentch's demons, I think I had better dedicate a video to the subject of magic in Warhammer Fantasy. The lore goes to great pains to give a very detailed account of how magic works in the world, and it's a pretty unique system, and I would not be doing it or you guys justice if I didn't make a video to go into great detail on how it works. So, coming next, a study on magic in Warhammer Fantasy lore. Okay, and play. Back to the horrors. It is coloured like the 8 winds themselves, and these demons use it to burn and warp their foes. I see them even now, drifting outside my window, their fire crackling and hissing as it soils the ground. Can the people not see them? I cry out to those in the street below. I tell them to run, to scream, to hide their faces from the Aether's mad denizens, but they just look at me, as though I were the mad one. Still they come, still they search for me. See how the flames leak from their every orifice. Yikes, that must have been one spicy curry. Surely the flame is alive, for where it hits the poor earth, smaller flames spring to life around it, and take on the form of these foolish men and women who stand below, staring up at me in their slack-jawed ignorance. Like tiny marionettes, these demonic fires impersonate what is happening around them, but in the most disturbing manner. They stare up at me, their beaming mouths hanging open, babbling stupidly, mocking the oblivious mortals that stand around them. The flame demons seem to ignore the little parodies of life that they have spawned, and as the flamers drift hither and yon upon their skirts of pinkish flesh, the little marionettes collapse into splattering pools of magic that slowly fade back into nothing. How horrible is this scene, how nightmarish and bizarre, but the worst, I fear, is yet to come. For I know that these monstrosities have only the most rudimentary and instinctive of minds. They exist to serve the will of Tzeentch, Tzeentch's great servants, his lords of change. And where the horrors leap and hover, the feathered ones cannot be far behind. The feathered lords are coming. Can you not see? Do you not care? Sigmar has abandoned you, and now the Lord of Change has come to collect his dues. We shall get to the feathered ones later in this video. Before we talk about the feathered Lords of Change, let's talk about a lesser demon that's very similar to the horrors, but with just enough differences to deserve its own classification. I'm talking about the Flamers of Tzeentch, also known as burning horrors and fire demons. The Flamers, much like the horrors, and pretty much like most of Tzeentch's minions, are made up purely of magical energy. They do, however, look a little different. Their bodies are tubular in shape, with many appendages sticking out. Each one of these appendages appears to end in a mouth with sharp, spiny teeth. Coolest of all, each one of these mouths spew forth magical flame. So much magical flame that they are given the name Flamer. The bottom of their bodies flare out into a skirt-like shape, which glides along the ground, again leaking magical fire. These mindless entities tend to accompany the horrors on the battlefield. So we have to imagine whole units of both these demons, whole units of creatures made up of pure magical energy, spewing magical fire all over the place, that not only burns, but mutates and changes anything it lands on. The ground itself changing and mutating in their wake. Those feathered ones, the Lords of Change, controlling them, almost like remote control cars, trying to place them in the path of any mortal that tries to oppose them. Poor mortals. If they aren't careful, they could emerge from that fight so mutated that they are indistinguishable from the horrors and flamers they sought to engage. Next up, once again, beings of pure energy, the demons known as Screamers are at least a physical shape that can be described, which makes my job a whole lot easier. Basically, the Screamers look like giant purple manta rays. These rays have a bit of a taste for the souls of mortals who are undergoing feelings of strong emotion, and so they glide about in the realm of chaos until the armies of Tzeentch are called into battle, knowing that whatever enemy they face, that enemy is likely to be feeling some pretty strong emotions, as you probably would in their situation. The rays have sharp horns and teeth all over their bodies that they use to slice through their enemies, all the while emitting an ear-shattering scream that stuns and terrifies many mortal kind. Then, pardon my American, it's soul-eating time. And the last of the lesser demons, with the most exciting and innovative of names, the Discs of Tzeentch. Now, the Liber Chaotica, that has been pretty quiet when it comes to Tzeentch's lesser demons, does have a little something to say when it comes to the discs. I have watched these creatures as they roamed the aether's tides like shoals of barracuda, searching for the vulnerable things that gutter and flicker within the depths of that cruel afterlife. They were vicious and uncaring hunters, seeming to be able to scent the dissipating souls of vulnerable mortals, hunting them relentlessly across the aether, only to tear them to pieces and carry back to their lord whatever scraps remained once they had finished. In that uncertain realm, these bizarre crosses between demon and physical construct were smoky and indistinct creatures whose shifting forms hinted at a profusion of teeth and sparkling eyes that coruscated with etheric energy. Yet when summoned to the mortal plane, I know that their raw magical bodies assume more definite, although still bizarre, and unlikely forms. They become these things from which they have earned their most common name, the discs of Tzeentch. For the majority become round and flattened, perhaps covered in hungry eyes, or else sheathed in some sort of living metal. These discs fly through the air, just as they do through the aether, darting and turning through the sky like sleek fish through clear waters. The greatest champions of Tzeentch are sometimes granted one of these strange creatures as a steed, allowing them to soar through the air upon its flat upper surface. Some extra information, because I love you all, if anyone is in fact watching. The Screamers, after many, many years, actually mutate into the discs. They are demons of change, after all. So, yeah, basically these discs are demons in their own right, but are most often used as steeds for other great demons or mortal champions of Tzeentch. Okay, so I said I wanted to cover Tzeentch in one video, but if I want to make each video a little shorter, then it looks like that's just not possible. I guess I'm just too informative for my own good, what can I say? So, therefore, we're going to finish this video on a high with the most powerful of the God of Change's minions. And in the next video, I'll cover some of the interesting special characters and say a little something on Tzeentch's mortal followers. Then it's a video on magic, and then we're on to Nurgle. That's the plan. It'll probably change. Quite fitting for this video, but there you go. So, without further ado, I present to you the Lord of Change itself, the Feathered One, the greater demon of Tzeentch. The big guy, the Lord of Change, also known as the Watching Lord, the Eyes of Tzeentch, and the Feathered Lord. So, first up, what does he look like? Well, basically like a giant bird of prey that stands upright on two talons, has giant wings, tends to hold a magical staff of some type, and to the eye of the beholder, exudes a magical power and presence. First and foremost, when you think of a Lord of Change, you have to think of the nature of change itself. Ever-constant change is the definition of chaos, and so it could be argued that a Lord of Change is the most powerful demonic representation of chaos itself. When a Lord of Change appears on the mortal plane, change and mutation follow. This can be physical change, such as beautiful flowers turning into thorny spines, or items disappearing to appear somewhere else. Perhaps most important to our study on the battlefield, soldiers facing a Lord of Change can undergo this effect. It could be something like that shiny new sword you are holding rusting into dust, or even turning into a stick. Or it could be something more devastating, like your legs turning into tentacles, or disappearing altogether. When meeting a Lord of Change, very few emerge unchanged in some way. The presence of a Lord of Change can also produce effects of a more subtle and cunning nature, and by that I mean changes to the mind. The most gallant and chivalrous soldier can become a raging psychopath. The bravest can turn into cowards. Again, I repeat, whether it be in body or in mind, very few emerge unscathed when meeting a Lord of Change. The next thing that comes to mind when thinking upon a Lord of Change is magic. As I said, I'll be making a video on magic, but what I will say for now is that Tzeentch is known as a god of ultimate knowledge. So great is his knowledge that it is even said he can look into the future. It therefore follows that a Lord of Change is extremely knowledgeable when it comes to arcane lore, with the knowledge of a multitude of spells. This makes it one of the most potent spellcasters in Warhammer fluff. The fact that it is also gifted with some of the most powerful arcane weapons only adds to its potency. A Lord of Change has the power to burn entire units to a crisp with magical fire, bring thunder down from the heavens, or turn a great hero into a gibbering, unrecognisable spawn of mutation. Its knowledge of foresight is so great that it is an extremely adept tactician on the battlefield, typically always able to keep a few steps ahead of whatever foe it faces. While the Feathered Lord is typically thought of as a mage when it comes to a fight, it is also a very powerful physical threat in its own right. It's a giant bird of prey, for God's sake. Its talons are like swords that can rip through the most powerful protective armours. Its beak likewise. Its wings mean it can soar above the battlefield and pick off enemies at will. And it possesses some of the most powerful magical weapons. Not only that, but they say one look in its eye can paralyse the stoutest of mortals, as they provide a window into the Lord's mind and the unfathomable complexity of its intellect. Once paralysed, these poor mortals are easy prey. Let's wrap this up, as always, with a passage from the Liber Chaotica on these greater demons of Tzeentch. And then I walked into the presence of the Feathered Lord, he who is the Eye of Tzeentch, he who is called the Watching Prince, he who is the greatest of all Tzeentch's demons. Huge he was, and silent, though his eyes, his terrible eyes, saw and knew all. Within his gaze lay all the wisdom and understanding of his great lord, Tzeentch himself, and I could scarce withstand to meet it. I do not understand how, but I knew that this great demon could not only see my flesh and skin, but also my bones and blood, my hopes and dreams, my failures and my fears. The demon's craning neck sat on a narrow feathered body, and his wings spread out behind him in multicoloured splendour. I am not sure whether he was blue or yellow, or indeed an entirely different or new colour for which there is no name or word to describe. His hue changed from moment to moment, perhaps because the demon did not regard it as relevant that he should retain any constancy of colour or appearance. Can anyone doubt that the Lords of Change are blessed with the multi-layered cunning and timeless wisdom of Tzeentch himself? As I stood before that timeless demon, I felt within myself that his was the deepest and most subtle understanding of all the mortal hopes and fears that drive our world within its well-worn rut. I knew just how thoroughly that demon understood and despised the entrapping comforts of stability and familiarity. What indeed could please that immortal lord more than to see the world broken and made anew and redirect the course of a life and history? To spill the dullest of mortal aspirations upon the ground while raising the hopes and ambitions of others up to an unexpected pinnacle of power. One cannot help but wonder what the fates have in store for us. Tzeentch has a hand in fate. That which can divine the further course of events can go out of its way to alter them. I fancy I can feel the strings that make my limbs dance. I have no free will. I think perhaps that it was a playful mind that lay behind that bird-like gaze, intelligent beyond all measure of the world, yet as uncaring of consequence as it was fascinated by it. For truly the Lords of Change are the truest avatars of their divine master, and so are the supreme manipulators of mortal affairs. Humanity is naught but an anthill to these creatures, and they are the ones who would kick it over. They send their champions across the world to do their bidding, undertaking 1,000 occurrences that might easily be mistaken as random or pointless. Yet all such events are pieces that fall into the complex and ever-changing plans of these mighty demons, plans that are beyond the comprehension of us mere mortals. Yet their interference with our lives is not always subtle. Change can also be violent and sudden, and let none suffer the misconception that the Lords of Change are above waging war to further its aims. The most potent weapon of Tzeentch is not brute force, but magic. What else? The Lords of Change are powerful sorcerers, as well as formidable tacticians. If they prefer to remain uncommitted in battle, it is not through lack of courage or ferocity on their part, but because the feathered lords always seek to direct their forces and control the flow of the fighting. As manifestation of Tzeentch's will, the Lords of Change must be the most unpredictable and manipulative of all the Ether's demons, and so my studies would imply they are the most readily summoned of all greater demons. Yet only the crassest fool would take a Lord of Change at his word, for he is more than likely to utter false or misleading prophecies to further his own eternal schemes. How many demonologists, I wonder, have made pacts with a Lord of Change and benefited greatly from it in the short term, only for their plans and ambitions to come to naught and be shattered, leaving them as twisted and mewling spawn? Surely it must be the majority of them, for who indeed has the knowledge, wisdom, and foresight to outplay the feathered lords at the game of politics and deception? But then, should a mortal be cunning enough to outwit such a creature, the rewards must indeed be limitless. Yet I am no such fool as to try. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please rate, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And have a good day. Toodle pip.